Good day, Patrick Johnson, and we begin our Canucks This Week video brought to you by Paragon Roofing, paragonroofingbc.ca, your best choice for roofing in Vancouver, British Columbia. Look them up, get a free quote, and there you go. So I thank them for bringing us this wonderful video where we'll talk about our Vancouver Canucks coming off a fresh loss. Mea culpa, I said they would win 5 games in the last week. I was wrong. Clearly, media doesn't know what they're talking about. But
only 4-1.
Yeah, only 4-1.
But well, let's talk 3-2. I guess actually, never mind. What am I saying?
Well, let's talk about this team and where they are. One of the reasons I was so bullish on them is when I looked at the teams they were playing in November, schedule seemed pretty favorable, and it still does. Out of their next 5 games, sandwiched around the Colorado Avalanche, they have 2 with the Kraken and 2 with the Sharks. So, losing 1 game to the Flames back-to-back where travel was involved, probably not the end of the world. You still bullish on this team, Patrick?
Yeah, I am. They're scoring enough. Like, there's the thing to not forget in this is that this is now a high-scoring league, right? So even when they dip, they're only going to score, 3 goals a game, and you're still winning games with 3 goals. It's not like they're falling off to 2 or 1 goal a game. There are teams around the league, teams that they played recently, the Sharks, who are really the Flames even last night. I know it sounds strange to say, but basically have been struggling to score. The Canucks, sure, there's some worrying stuff, like they aren't scoring a ton 5-on-5 right now. This week they've only basically scored 4 goals. 3 of them came in that Montreal game. But if this is them slumping in that sense, there's a lot of other things going right, and that's the sign of a good team. Their power play is still as strong. They're getting great goaltending. I don't think there's any suggestion they're going to lose their goaltending. The environment that they're playing in, the goalies are playing behind, that defense environment is still pretty solid. The Canucks have been doing a really good job of forcing shots to be taken only from the outside, not giving away tons of problems in the front, letting their goalies see the shots. They're in many ways a team that is showing the gaps that certainly public data now has, that as teams have become more knowledgeable about how the game works and what the most effective plays to make and how to create goals. To go back to Travis Green's old statement, it's not an easy league to score goals in. Well, no, he wasn't wrong. But if you can figure out the hard stuff and do that effectively, you're going to have a good chance. And the Canucks, conversely, at the opposite end of the ice, have been very good at this. So, yeah, there's enough points in their favor. There's enough things they're doing well, and the number of things they're doing badly is at a minimal level overall. It's a good trend still.
I'm going to mix metaphors all over the place here, just because it's. I hope it makes some sort of point. It does amaze me. We can talk about hockey culture all we want, and I'm sure there's a bunch of hockey culture people who, if they are watching this, are going to be yelling and screaming in a minute. But there's this whole adage that I don't care how good you are offensively, you have to be defensively responsible, right? Like if the equivalent in soccer would be, benching Cristiano Ronaldo or Lionel Messi because they aren't coming back into their own box to pick up a team on the player on the counterattack. Like, there are other sports are like, hey, that's your specialty. We never seem to bench the defensive specialists because they can't score, but it's the other way around.
Right.
But that's, as you said, that's the hardest thing to do, right? Like, I mean, you can work hard, be positionally aware, and be defensively responsible. It's much harder to teach someone how to score. So when you look at roster construction, you look at how this team is, for as much of a gnashing of teeth as we've done over the last 7-8 years about the Canucks and how bad their blue line is, they've got a solid goaltender and they've got elite end offensive talent with Hughes, Miller, Pettersson, Besser as well with his resurgence this year. Like, does this make the Canucks a real contender?
I think they're still in the window where you have to look around at who's next to them and compare them and how you feel about this team's overall approach, their overall depth. You look at Vegas. Are the Canucks as deep as Vegas? I'm not sure anybody's going to argue that yet. Certainly, they have three guys leading the NHL in scoring. I don't think anybody expects that to sustain itself, but they have shown their chops offensively, certainly at the top end, certainly through their power play. But do you see this team as being as strong as Vegas? Are they as strong as Vegas is defensively? That is a great question. I don't think they're quite there. I think they're getting there. I think clearly we can see that Ian Cole and Carson Soucy were very smart, very astute pickups in the offseason. And we're going to see, I think, the how much the absence of Soucy over the next 6 to 8 weeks affects the overall defensive approach, because there is a gap between him and what's below him. And I don't think you necessarily find that with Vegas. LA, obviously a younger team overall, with lots of scoring talent. And then with, still a fabulous veteran in Anze Kopitar, one of the truly great two-way players of the last 20 years, still leading the way. That's maybe that makes more sense. There is a reason why probably Vegas is the leading team in this division, than that the Canucks and the Kings are somewhere behind that. And then of course there's the Oilers, who have the best player in the world, and enough around him that they could certainly score their way up past a lot of their problems, as long as they're getting some saves from their goalie. Are they head and shoulders above any of those teams? No, clearly not, right? Like, they're in the discussion. So does that make them a contender? I don't think so. I think that they're able to somehow add a winger, which I think they would like to do. And obviously, as is very clear, they would like to add a defenseman, at least one. Then you start getting into that discussion. And they're certainly positioned, I think, to try to get into that discussion. And obviously with the Elias Pettersson contract situation, with Oliver Ekman-Larsson's buyout penalty going up next year and then up for the next 2 seasons, this in many ways is a year to try to make those things happen. In hockey, in many ways, you do have to live for the now. The salary cap, I mean, we see this in the NBA, right? The salary cap forces teams to live now. Let's see what we can do now, and we'll fix the next problem next week, next season. What are we doing this season? Are we trying to win? There's a little bit of that in the Canucks, I would say, right now. It's certainly in their thinking. They've got to make that happen. They've got to execute. They've got to make some trades. They don't have an easy, straight, direct line to adding players. I think, as I've mentioned before, that a guy like Anthony Beauvillier, you're going to just have to move off his contract. I think you'll have to shovel him off to San Jose and probably not get anything back. And then you start, but the mere fact that you create cap space by doing that makes you better. The Connor Garland question is still there. They, of course, would love to find a way to get off Tyler Myers, but I don't know if there's really anything realistic where you're going to find someone to take him. And it's a position where you actually gain by doing. I know that sounds strange to say, but there is enough in Myers still that you don't just trade him for nothing. You obviously need to create space. You need to add another player. You need to put some involvement. But in the end, is it worth taking the cost of doing that, or just shoving him down to your 6th or 7th defenseman role? They're close. They're close to calling themselves a contender. They're clearly, they should be a playoff team. Unless things go catastrophically wrong, they will be in the playoffs. Now it becomes, how do they get to that next level, and can they do that? And it's not impossible, but like anything, no team in the NHL is going to be able to say, oh, it'll be easy to become a contender. The Canucks are in that spot, and it's going to be a challenge, and it'll be interesting to see what they're able to do.
You compared them to Edmonton. Obviously, their goal difference is a 43 better than Edmonton's, which is wild. They're 7 goals better. Their goal differential, they've had a couple of blowouts, obviously, which reflects that. But when you've got the good goaltending, you're playing sound organizationally, and you're scoring goals with your lead-in talent.
I'll just say on that, just on that point, just on sort of the defense question, and I've talked a lot about this. We don't really know, like I've mentioned earlier, the metrics and the gaps and those. Once we start getting to like 20 games, which is basically next, sort of the next couple of weeks, you can start looking at how the teams have done in terms of goals against. Like, goals against will tell you if they're giving up a lot of goals, they're going to keep giving up a lot of goals. If they haven't been giving up a lot of goals, there's enough they're doing right that luck is kind of starting to fade out of the equation, and now we're starting to see. So that's the other thing to watch, I would say, just on all this in the Canucks, that if they carry on with this sort of solid defensive record they've shown, they're going to be a pretty solid defensive team.
Yeah, and really, they've given up one more goal than Vegas, so they're in that conversation as well. And I will add caveat. You never know what could happen in terms of injuries.
Exactly.
Let's say your power play quarterback, Quinn Hughes.
Yeah. No, exactly.
There's a ligament in his thumb and needs surgery and ends the season, as my Bengals and Joe Burrow are. So there's a lot of unknowns. But I would say
as I was joking before, I'm now at my trade deadline day in my fantasy football league, and it's like my team's doing really well. So how much extra stuff do I add, even if I don't need it? As
long as you beat Drance, that's all anyone cares about.
I know,
Patrick.
And that's part of the whole story here. But but you're right. Like that's exactly it. Like Jim Rutherford himself said, if everything goes right, we'll make the playoffs. But not everything's going to go right. Was the implication.
Yeah.
And now they're in that window where they're having to survive a couple injuries and see where they go. And if they have another one, they'll just have to keep managing their way through all this.
One thing I did want to talk to you about before the moment has passed is we saw the return of Bo Horvat this week.
Right.
And then it dawned on me, I can't think of another hockey club that has such animosity with so many of its former players. You can talk about Pavel Bure and how some people didn't want him honored because he wanted out.
Right.
Trevor Linden, we saw him make those comments lately about Jim Benning, and other people were like, "Shut up, Trevor! You had your shot. This team's winning now."
Yeah.
You go through Ryan Kessler, Todd Bertuzzi, even when he left, and there may be individual reasons for a lot of these. Roberto Luongo, my contract sucks. Well, cap recapture.
Yeah.
It's actually pretty astonishing when you go through, and we're not just talking about, a guy who came in for a year or two. We're talking about serious names of players who, did the club well and have a bit of a complicated relationship with the fans. Is this an anomaly? What's the reason behind it in your thought? Or I've racked my brains. I mean, even Patrick Waugh, who had such a public falling out, and demand, literally publicly, I'm never playing for this team again, wildly cheered when his number went up in the rafters. Now, you win a cup, and I think a lot of ills are forgotten. Maybe that's it with the Canucks, but do you see this anywhere else?
Well,
I mean, Calgary, Johnny Hockey wanted out. Jerome McGinley, shucks, at the end of his career, wanted a chance to go. I don't seem to sense Calgary's an actual interesting example, because a lot of these guys who went to Calgary, because they got better offers, or because the Canucks, because of their own cap machinations, couldn't keep them. I've seen vitriol sent towards Markstrom and sent towards Tanev for looking after themselves. What is it with this fan group?
Well, I think partly, I think it's two things. I think it's false. It's sort of faint hope. The forever sort of that you're always hoping maybe this is a year, even if people know better, right? You should never think this is a year with the Vancouver Canucks, but there's been enough people along the way. And then there's been something has turned, something has changed. You mentioned all those players where time was to move on, something happened, or, you think about the guys who are still beloved, say someone like Luongo. That speaks to their personality. It speaks to how people feel about them. That rises above. I mean, Patrick Waugh, there's a great case of time heals all wounds, right? Like a player that, you're right, left in great frustration, really upset. I think always made it clear. He obviously had the back and forth with the fans in the fateful game, the 9-goal game, but the frustration was with the organization, and it spilled over with a coach that was completely over his head, didn't really know how to treat his players. Certainly didn't know how to treat, even then, this is 30 years ago, how to treat what we would have said the modern athlete then. But it was that player, he was a player so beloved that he was able to rise above everything. I think more than anything.
Bure, same thing. Bure, Bure was a man that time did not heal all wounds. Yes, he got an ovation when they retired, but there was Patrick. We're talking about 2 decades had passed, and there was still a sizable chunk of the fan base were no, and his number should not be up in the rafters.
And this is what I was going to say. So time heals all wounds to a point, because because of the first thing, which is that faint hope that people have held on to this idea. Maybe this will happen. Maybe this will happen. This person will lead us to glory. And you get this undercurrent of people who are going, well, he didn't, so therefore, I mean, think about when they were retiring Naslin's jersey, like the number of people who said, well, he never did anything. And you're like, he's one of the greatest. Like, he was in 2002-03, like, he was the best player in the world. Like, this was a guy who was at the pinnacle of the game. And yes, the Canucks did not win the Stanley Cup. The Canucks petered out because their goalie wasn't good enough, right? But in the end, there's a player that is beloved in this town because he did everything right. I would say the exception is exactly how the departure happened. Would Todd Bertuzzi get the same kind of ovation? Does Todd Bertuzzi, if he doesn't punch Steve Moore, would Todd Bertuzzi be a contender for Ring of Honor? Probably, right? But he's never going to be there. There is that difficult. That I think part of it is that maybe it just feels this way because of we deal with it every day, and maybe it's true in other cities, but everything has been so dramatic, that your favorite team, the 82 team, right? Like that run was dramatic, right? Like that was out of nowhere, and a sort of a beautiful, wonderful kind of us against the world narrative, but in a positive way. Like there's nothing ever, you never hear anything about that team being, sort of that. Unlike the sort of Mike Gillis position, which was us against the world, even though they were the best team in the NHL,
and they really were against the rest of the world, right? Like people did not, outside of this market, everyone was embraced the hate because people didn't like them,
right? But that in many, 2011, like shoulda, coulda, woulda, and it didn't. 94 being so close, that kind of team that finally coalesced, and they were sort of a lovable kind of our guys kind of feeling, even though that was a very good team. There's still that can never quite get there. And
is it an insecurity because the teams never won a Stanley Cup? That fans look at like, oh, Bury didn't want us. He wanted to leave. He wanted to go to greener pastures.
I think that's
like Luongo didn't want to be here. Luongo wanted to go play in Florida. Oh, they don't like us. Screw you guys. You don't want to. And if you win a cup, you can kind of say, look, we're part of that club now. But it's I find it fascinating. I really do. How many, and not just like peripheral figures, right? Like, we know Connor Garland wanted to trade, but pardon me, we're talking about key players. That there's a segment of Canuck fans who are like, screw you. And I don't know, it just strikes me as odd.
The Horvat example is a good one because there you see it, especially now because social media is right in front of it. But there are people talk to people, and there's people who literally that they have. First of all, they're like, well, he is overpaid, so good riddance. Oh,
if someone offered you double your salary to go somewhere else, would you not take it? Like,
but that's the position you see. Then there's like there is that element of people who are like, well, when did he ever stand up for his teammates? When did this, that, and the other? They want him to I guess, and in a similar vein, Tripper Linden, like, and yet Linden, that was a criticism I think that people always had of Linden, but I would say Horvat, like Linden, and for most people's viewpoint, they never were. That was never even in the equation for them. It was that this guy did what he could. He represented the team. I think this is what it is for most people. But you're right. The critics are there, and they're notable. They're not just some fringe sort of fringe group. Like there's a sizable percentage of people who were like, "Yeah, didn't do it, didn't get it done. You were the captain." Shane O'Brien. I saw this clip come through my Instagram the other day. That was Shane O'Brien's point. I don't agree with it, but here's a guy who knew what it was like to play in Vancouver, loved playing in Vancouver, and hears of Horvat basically cracking jokes about the old place in the new place, and he's just like, "What are you talking about, dude? You didn't do anything." And I don't, like I said, I don't agree with that position, but that's certainly something out there. And if that's what a former player is thinking, I mean, what's the average fan going to think?
Well, if Shane O'Brien had done half as much on the ice as he did at the Roxy, maybe people would have speak of him a little more fondly in town. Although sometimes I wonder how much, there's a certain portion of the fan base that loves that rough and tumble, like versus the other guy. It is a fascinating thing. I still think that as great as this place is to live, there's still a little bit of a small town insecurity about Vancouver, no matter how much it grows. Justin McElroy jokes about this all the time about how many politicians use the phrase world class in so many different contexts. And it's like we're begging people to put us in the world class conversation, right? World-class cities don't worry about people calling them world-class, and And, Stanley Cup winning organizations don't really care whether people like them or not. They just, they are.
Yeah.
All right, we got to wrap up here. But before we do, as always, Paragon Roofing, bc.ca for all your roofing needs. What is the ceiling or the roof, as you will, of the Canucks this week, Patrick? I know they've got, stretched real hard on that one. I might have pulled something. Really, before we record these videos Thursdays, Fridays, there's 3 games, Kraken, Sharks, and Avalanche.
Yeah.
I'm going to include the next 2 games. We'll go with these 5.
Next week.
I am, again, when we record our next video, there'll still be 2 games to play, so I can hedge it at that point. But I'm going to say right now, 5-0. 5-0, Patrick, in these next 5
going for it
games.
again, hey? No, I think they'll beat the Kraken tomorrow. I think they get themselves. I mean, it is a tough schedule. This is the thing, right? Like, they've got a ton of games right now. They're right in the middle of it. They're coming off 5 games in 8 days, 5 different cities. A trip to Ontario and Quebec. They finally get to come home and play.
Don't want to hear it, Patrick. I don't want to hear it. I hate this when the team goes they'll go on a road trip and they'll include their own time zone twice to bump up the stats about how arduous it is. These next 5 games, Colorado's the only one not on the Pacific time zone.
Yeah.
So no time changes, no excuses. 5-0.
No. I'm just saying. Finally, they've got 2 games at home. They've obviously got the trick, but it's a midweek trip. There's nothing around it. It's not like they're playing a game back to back. They get to go to Colorado. They get to fly home. They get Thanksgiving. They get to hang out in Seattle. Beautiful place to spend a Thanksgiving Thursday, Friday night in Seattle.
Especially with the Seahawks playing.
Yeah, they're gonna have a good time, right? Like, this is gonna be. They're in the middle of a stretch of a lot of games. The end of next week will be tough because 3 and 4 is tough. That's true. But they should beat the Kraken. They obviously have to beat the Sharks. I think the Avalanche, they're going to lose. That's a tough one on the road. Kraken, I'm going to say probably Kraken at home are going to win. I think, but then they're playing the Sharks on Saturday. They're going to take 3 of 5 in the next week. And that's kind of how the rest of the season's going to go. Like, they're going to win 3 out of, they need to win. I think I was doing the math. They sort of have to take 35 wins. They've got 67 games left. They need to go to sort of a 540 pace. Like, that's a lower points percentage over the remainder of the season than they managed on the totality of the 21-22 season when Bruce Boudreau came in halfway through the season, right? Like, that's how big their run was under Boudreau in the second half, that they got to a pretty solid record that they don't even have to play at that pace. They don't have to play at the pace that they played in the second half that year. They just have to nice, steady, win 3 out of every 5, take points of 3 out of every 5, and they're going to be fine.
Oh, I say they're going to be 5-0. Cynical Patrick says they're going to be 3-2. So we'll record this when there's still 2 games left to go, and we'll recalibrate for that too.
Yeah.
Thanks for listening, everyone. We save the good stuff for the people who listen to the very end of this. We are giving away Canuck tickets every month. All you have to do is go and comment under one of Patrick's stories, or one of Ben's, or one of JJ's. Any Canuck story, we're going to pick the best comment every month. We'll win a pair of tickets. So go to the website, sign up for Canuck Report. You can win stuff. I believe there's a signed jersey up for grabs for registered users for Canucks Report. So go to our website, find out all the good stuff, and we will talk to you next week.